everybody. Welcome back to another episode from Your Own Pathway Therapy Conversations. Here we confront the systems, conditioning, and professional realities people were taught to normalize, but were rarely taught to question. Because eventually, every system reveals what it refuses to confront. So it's time to own it. So, this week's episode, I wanted to focus on why systems need trauma informed leaders and professionals, especially in capacities and settings that, let's be honest, a lot of us therapists were really never taught to put ourselves in. And as I continue to do this work, I see how being trauma informed is needed more than ever. And this week, I want to talk more about why systems need trauma informed leaders and professionals. So, before I dive into that, I actually want to talk more about how I even got here. Because, of course, at the beginning, you heard me introduce myself as trauma informed leadership consultant and a systems psychoanalyst. And recently, I found myself asking why. Why do I even call myself trauma informed? Why is that still at the forefront of my work? Because leadership did not lead me into trauma informed work. Trauma informed work led me to leadership and systems. So my work started in social work and then in transition to therapy. And then it started in human behavior. And then it started sitting with people and listening to what they were experiencing. And over time, I realized that what people brought into therapy was not always just about family, relationships, childhood, or personal issues. A lot of it was about work, a supervisor, a team, a workplace, the system, a leadership decision. And that is where my work started to really shift. Why? Because I realized that workplaces were not just affecting productivity, they were affecting people's well being. One of the biggest things I think, especially here and this country and actually everywhere, is believe it or not, work is a relationship. And that is a huge realization that I had to go through as I went through as I work with my clients was this. Work is a relationship. Like we talk about family, we talk about friends, we talk about romantic partners, but we never think of work as a relationship. And work is a relationship. We don't often think about it that way because we are paid, we are compensated, but it is a relationship. The only difference is that money is attached to it. And because money is attached to it, people often tolerate things they would never tolerate in another relationship. The disrespect, the humiliation, I said it right, the chronic stress, the poor communication, being blamed for things outside of their control. How about being repeatedly dismissed? Being misunderstood. And because it is work, people often tell themselves, you know what? This is just part of the job. This is just what I have to deal with. This is just what comes with getting paid. But one of the conversations I found myself having with clients over and over again was this: if this wasn't a workplace, would you still stay in this relationship? And many times the answer was absolutely not. Not because work and personal relationships are exactly the same, but because work is still a relationship. And for many people, it is a relationship where they spend the most time, 40 hours a week minimum, sometimes more, year after year. And If relationships can shape people, then workplaces can shape people too. Moving on, let's talk about trauma and how trauma is often understood too narrowly. And when most people hear the word trauma, they often think about childhood, abuse, neglect, violence, major life events, the big T trauma, as we like to refer it. The kind of trauma that may meet criteria for post traumatic stress disorder or the PTSD. And certainly those experiences matter. But through clinical work, through trauma work, and especially EMDR, for those who have done EMDR training, I've learned that trauma is not always limited to the major catastrophic events. There is also what many people refer to as the little t trauma. And these are the experiences that may not look catastrophic from the outside, but still leave a lasting impact. And this could include being publicly criticized, or again, being humiliated, or being isolated, or being placed in impossible situations, being made to feel unsafe, unwanted, in a place where you are expected to keep showing up. And I want to say this clearly: trauma informed has become a popular phrase. A lot of people use it, a lot of organizations claim it, but claiming you're trauma informed and being trained to understand trauma are not the same thing. Yes, I said that. Trauma informed is not a label you put on, it's a lens you're trained to use. And without the training underneath it, the words start to lose their meaning. And even among us therapists, there can be debate about what should be or should not be considered trauma. But one of the things I have learned is this: reactions and perception should not be dismissed simply because someone else would not have experienced the situation the same way. One person may say, that was not that big of a deal, and another person may experience the same moment as humiliating, as threatening, painful, or even life changing. And trauma informed practice taught me to become curious about the difference, not dismiss it. Because not every difficult experience meets clinical criteria for trauma, for PTSD. But that does not mean the experience has no impact. That does not mean it did not affect trust, safety, belonging, confidence, identity, or how someone engages with the word around them. Trauma informed work also taught me to spend less time deciding whether someone's reaction was justified and more time understanding what the reaction might be telling me. So, moving on, I want to talk about how trauma informed changed how I understood behavior. And this is where trauma informed work changed me. It was not just about compassion. It was not just about empathy. It was not just about understanding. Yes, those things matter a lot and they're important. But trauma informed practice changed how I understood behavior. And I want to be honest about something. In most of my work, especially in the episodes, I'm really trying to not mention all the behaviors, like make a list of behaviors and focus on the symptoms. But the behavior is usually just the surface. But I've learned that, especially in trauma informed work, the behavior is exactly where we have to look. Not because the behavior is a problem, but because the behavior is what often gets misread. And what often gets misread is what gets corrected, managed, and disciplined. So, in this episode, I'm staying with the behaviors on purpose and the symptoms on purpose. Every institution encounters behavior. Someone is frustrated, someone is pulling back, someone is resistant, someone is disengaged or emotional, or they have to advocate. And what often happens is that the behavior becomes the explanation. Yes, we see the behavior, and then we assign meaning to it. And then we move forward as though we understand what we are actually looking at. But the thing is, trauma informed practice asks a different question. What if we are misunderstanding what the behavior is actually communicating? Because behavior is often information, and sometimes the behavior is not the problem. As I was coming up with this episode, I'm being very honest right here. I also reflected on my own behavior and my own journey, which really led me to the work that I'm doing now. And through all of this, I thought about my own behavior, not just my clients, but and not just the organizations that I worked in, my own behavior. What happened when I felt threatened in situations, and especially in systems and organizations where I felt threatened? And, I've done this in episodes in therapy conversations where I talked about my own journey about organization trauma. And I also thought about what happened when I did not feel heard. What happened when I felt dismissed? What happened when I felt misunderstood? What happened when I felt confronted? I remember how I felt psychologically, emotionally, physically, and mentally when assumptions were made about my behavior. When I was talked to in ways that felt so dismissive, or when I was accused of things that were not actually what was happening. And I remember thinking, this is not what is happening. You are not taking the time to understand what I am saying. You're not taking the time to understand what I am feeling. And even when I try to explain it, you dismiss it. I remember having those conversations. And the thing is, once that happens, something changes. You stop feeling safe. You stop feeling understood. You stop feeling like the relationship is reciprocal. And so what happens? Eventually you start protecting yourself. So what do? You keep your head down. You stop volunteering for work opportunities. You stop engaging. You stop bringing your full self into the room. So what do? You do your job. You do your time. And from the outside, someone may look at that and say, you know what, Paya? You used to be such a go-getter. You used to be this, you used to be that. Now we see that you're disengaged. We see that you're pulling back. We see that you're not participating anymore. They or you or me, you're not as invested as you used to be. But they are seeing the behavior. That they are not seeing is what produced that behavior in the first place. Because the behavior did not appear out of nowhere, the behavior changed in response to something. And that is often a perceived threat, a repeated frustration, feeling misunderstood, feeling dismissed, feeling like it was no longer safe to fully engage. And that gave me so much more clarity about human behavior, about visible behavior, about what is happening beneath the behavior that is being perceived, such as, judged and being interpreted. Behavior often makes sense once you understand what people have been adapting to. And so that led me to really create one of my, come up with come up with this, statement of mine where I say, you know what, no matter where I went, no matter what I listened to, they may have moved a different system, a different job, um, or something new, but it kept coming back to me where it was the same old shit yet different system. And what this means is this realization, again, not only came from my clients, but with me too, because coming from my own professional experience, again, as well. Like many people, there were times in my career when I thought, you know what? Maybe, maybe the next place will be different. You know, maybe the grass is greener somewhere else in this crappy old place. Or sometimes, honestly, it was. But sometimes it wasn't. I remember quitting a job to go this other place where I'm like, what the heck did I do? Because, and then I realized, going from job to job, I realized because no matter where I went, I kept encountering similar frustrations, the same tensions, the same misunderstandings, the same adaptations, and the similar expectations that people were expected to compensate for when the system was not meeting their needs. I mean, I've worked in healthcare, I've worked in government, I've worked in startups, I've worked in corporate mental health, and I worked in roles where I saw clients directly, and I worked in roles where I did not see clients at all. Eventually, I had to confront something. This was not just happening in one workplace. It was not just happening in one industry. It was happening all over. And essentially, it was the same old shit, different system, which gave me a tremendous amount of clarity because it forced me to stop looking at every situation as an isolated event. I started paying attention to patterns. And the more I paid attention to the patterns, the more I started asking different questions. Not just, what is wrong with this person? Not just, what is wrong with this workplace? I started looking and assessing and asking, why? Why? Why do these same dynamics keep showing up? Why do people in completely different systems describe similar experiences? Why are people adapting to conditions that nobody is addressing? And this is where my work began moving beyond individual stories and towards understanding systems. So, this is where human systems integrity emerge. Social work taught me to look at context. Therapy taught me to listen beneath what was actually being presented. Trauma informed practice taught me to slow down the interpretation. And systems work taught me to ask bigger questions. What is the system producing in people and why? That question became the foundation of my work. Because if behavior makes sense in context for individuals, then behavior also makes context for teams, organizations, institutions, communities, and systems. And that is why I call myself a trauma informed leadership consultant and a systems psychoanalyst. For me, those are not separate identities, they are integrated. Trauma informed practice helps me understand the behavior. Human systems integrity helps me understand the conditions producing that behavior. So, trauma informed practice asks, what might we be misunderstanding? While human systems integrity asks, what is the system producing in people and why? So, you see the integration right there. And together, they create a fuller picture. Because the thing is, systems are constantly interpreting behavior. They're interpreting employee behavior. They're interpreting leadership behavior. They're interpreting team and client behavior. And when systems misinterpret behavior, they often respond to the symptom while missing the condition. So, what do? They correct it, they manage it, they discipline, they label, they pathologize, they individualize it. But the thing is, they do not always ask, what is actually producing this? What conditions shape this behavior? What has this person, team, or system been adapting to? And that is why trauma informed professionals are so needed in systems and organizations right now. Not because we are softer, not because we excuse everything, not because accountability does not matter, but because we are trained to slow down the interpretation. We're trained to ask what happened before we assigned meaning. We are trained to recognize that behavior does not emerge in isolation. And in systems, that matters because systems can create the very behaviors that they later punish, criticize, or misunderstand. So, as I close down this episode, one of the biggest misconceptions about trauma informed practice is that it's all about being softer. And it's not. It's about being more accurate because behavior without context is easy to get wrong. And throughout my career, whether I was working with clients, organizations, leaders, or systems, I kept seeing the pattern. People were reacting to what they could see, but they were not seeing what they produce or what they produce. The more I did this work, the more I realized that many of the things we label as problems are often adaptations to pressure, adaptations to conditions, adaptations to environments that people have been trying to survive, to navigate, or make sense of. And this is why systems need trauma informed leaders and professionals. Because if we only respond to behavior, we may never understand the conditions creating it. If we never understand the conditions creating it, we will keep asking people to change inside systems that remain unchanged. And that is part of the systems work that is often missed. Sometimes the behavior is not the problem. The behavior is the evidence of conditions people have been adapting to all along. And if you are a leader who is watching this or in a decision making role, if we are serious about leadership, about well being and accountability and systems integrity, then we cannot keep asking, what is wrong with our people? We have to start asking, what is the system producing in people and why? So, that is all I have for this week's episode about trauma informed. And I hope you enjoyed this. I hope this episode gave some insights about what trauma informed leadership consulting is and the perspective of trauma informed, especially with human systems integrity. So, as always, take care of yourself. Get the rest that you need. I'll see you all next time. This is your own pathway where we confront the systems, conditioning, and realities people were taught to professionally contain. And now you know what? It's time to own it. I'll see y'all next time. Bye.